So we are going to move on now to the famous question of whether or not Balrogs had wings. So first of all, Dave, why, if people don't know, why is this an important question? What's the big deal about it? Why is there so much debate online and between Tolkien fans?
Yeah, well, I'm sure there was plenty of debate before the films came out, but when the film came out, Peter Jackson took his own view of what the Balrogs were described as, and he gave them wings. I think actually you and I heard John Howe in person talking about this at the Rings of Power premiere, how like he was heavily involved in the designing of the Balrog with Peter Jackson. So it wasn't just like, oh, idiot Peter, like it was all his fault. But anyways, I'm sure you're going to read the passage, but I know that there is a very ambiguous description of the Balrogs where it says something about their shadow is like winged around them, or it kind of uses the word wings as almost like a description, but it's not like to say that they have wings, because Tolkien does this all the time. He could say, you know, like Gandalf would say, "Fly, you fools!" Like he's not saying actually fly. It's just the language he used to say run away. And this language might have been talking about how the shadow surrounded the Balrog, but I don't know. I've read that passage a few times, and sometimes I'm like, yes, I do think that they don't have wings, but then other times I'm like, yeah, maybe Peter Jackson got it right. It's hard to know.
It is hard to know. And I've read I've read the Fellowship of the Ring book so many times, and sometimes I'm like, that makes me feel like they do, and sometimes I'm like, that makes me feel like they don't. But researching this podcast, I've kind of been looking up different things and looking into different. It's like there isn't that much source material to actually be able to decide definitively either way. Like you can probably make a good guess, and I mean, if I had to choose now after the research I've done, I'd probably say that I don't think they had wings, and if they did, they definitely weren't functional wings. They're probably just like just there to look nice.
But Durin's Bane in the film, his wings don't seem to be functional. Like he falls down. It just kind of looks like he almost is like the skeleton of a winged creature, and that's what remains. Like, you know, his horn, like he might have looked completely different, but like when he stretches out his wings, it's just like the bones, and there's no actual like thing that could help him fly. Like he falls down the
also, I think when they fell down that little like cavern, that little chasm, it just seems like at some points there wasn't enough space. Like there wasn't enough space to actually like open up and have like the full wingspan. So in that shot, I remember being younger and I was like, why I watch those movies? I never for one moment thought, why didn't he fly?
Why doesn't he fly?
Because it just looked like it's such a small space, and his wingspan would have been so huge. It was like, well, he didn't have space to open up his wings, and he just, and then he was tumbling and he was all out of sorts. But we also we kind of like. Yeah, they don't really behave like they had wings either, because as we said, we've seen a few times that they died from falling. We never hear about these kind of like surprise attacks by Gothmog or we never hear like we're going to see a little bit later that like Durin's Bane, it's not just like the battle that we see in the movie with Gandalf. He doesn't just fall down and kills him straight away. That battle went on for 10 days and they end up like falling to like the lowest point in the abyss. Gandalf ends up like following him for a few days to try and find his way out. And he basically is...
They go to like the highest peak.
They go to the highest peak, exactly. This peak, which is called Zirak Zigil. And that's and then they fight there for like 3 days, I think, non-stop fighting there on top of that peak. And at no point... And it's like Gandalf is kind of like pursuing the Balrog. He's kind of chasing him down again. Super badass move from Gandalf. But there's no point where the Balrog is just like, I'm on the top of a mountain and this guy is trying to kill me. I'm just going to fly away. So, I mean, if he had wings that were functional, he probably could have done that.
How I would counter that is, they went to the lowest depths of Khazad-dûm, and then they went to the highest peak. Like, how did they get there so quickly? Like, it would take probably more than 10 days just to hike it. So, maybe at one point Gandalf was on top of the Balrog and he's like, right, I'm just going to fly up to the peak here. And then, I
don't know. I don't think it would take more than 10 days to hike to the highest peak.
But
sure,
like,
you could do Everest in a couple of days.
Fighting. Yeah.
Anyway, but fighting, not non-stop fighting. There's some times where the Balrog was running and
we'll take a break and we'll hike.
No, but like there were times that the Balrog was trying to run away from Gandalf, and Gandalf was pursuing him and chased him, and also Gandalf was saying he actually followed him because the Balrog knew the way out. And Gandalf didn't know the way out. He was like, my only escape, my only hope was to follow the Balrog to get out of these pits.
God, that's
and
great.
He also mentioned that the Balrog seemed to know his way around there like really, really well, like knew it like the back of his hand. It's like, well, he did spend 5,000 years hanging around there, I suppose. So fair enough.
But sleep.
Yeah, he was sleeping for most of it. Anyway, I'm going to get into the actual main confusing points now, which are the quotes. Mm-hmm. So first of all, I'm going to read 2 quotes, which are maybe less controversial, but first one is from Morgoth's Ring, which is, quote, "Swiftly they arose, and they passed with winged speed over Hithlum, and they came to Lamoth as a tempest of fire." This is after I told you that Morgoth calls for the Balrogs, and it says they arose and they passed with, quote, winged speed.
Winged speed.
And again, I mean, that's
just describing how quick they got there, as if they flew.
Exactly. It's they got there as so you could be like, oh, look, winged speed. They definitely had wings. You could say that about anything, like as in, oh, he got there as if he's on wings, like, you know, as the pigeon flies or whatever, you know. He got there really, really quickly. Then there's another quote here, which is from the appendix of the Lord of the Rings, which is, quote, "Thus they roused from sleep, a thing of terror that, flying from Thangorodrim, had lain hidden at the foundations of the earth since the coming of the host of the west, a Balrog of Morgoth." So they're speaking about, like, they had roused this hidden, this terror, and it says flying from Thangorodrim, and it uses the term flying. But again, like, I would say to that Gandalf uses the word fly all the time, and not just Gandalf, but Tolkien uses it in his writing, saying they like, you know, we must fly, which means we must go quickly. So they're not really the 2 strongest points. However, if I read now from the little passage where we, you know, properly get to see the Balrog, and it's actually, you know, we read a moment ago where they didn't know yet it was a Balrog, and now we're going to read this part. So, reading from the same chapter, Bridge of Khazad-dûm, quote, "What it was could not be seen. It was like a great shadow, in the middle of which was a dark form of a man's shape, maybe, yet greater, and a power and terror seemed to be in it and to go before it. It came to the edge of the fire, and the light faded as if a cloud had bent over it. Then, with a rush, it leaped across the fissure. The flames roared up to greet it, and wreathed about it, and a black smoke swirled in the air. Its streaming mane kindled and blazed behind it. In its right hand was a blade, like a stabbing tongue of fire, and in its left it held a whip of many thongs. Aye, aye, wailed Legolas. A Balrog is come. Gimli stared with wide eyes. Durin's bane, he cried, and letting his axe fall, he covered his face. A Balrog, muttered Gandalf. Now I understand. He faltered and leaned heavily on his staff. What an evil fortune, and I am already weary. So that's the moment that they realize that this is actually a Balrog. I like the way that they speak about his streaming mane kindled and blazed behind it. So you're like, he had a mane basically on fire, which is a really cool little description there.
That's cool.
Then we get the quote a little bit down where Gandalf tells them, you know, this foe is beyond any of you, and fly and all that kind of stuff. But I want to keep going down, and it says here that the Balrog reached the bridge, and keep going down. His enemy halted again, facing him, and the shadow about it reached out like 2 vast wings. It raised the whip, and the thongs whined and cracked. Fire came from its nostrils. You cannot pass, he said. The orc stood still, and a dead silence fell. I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you. Flame of Udun. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass. The Balrog made no answer. The fire in it seemed to die, but the darkness grew. It stepped forward slowly onto the bridge, and suddenly it drew itself up to a great height, and its wings were spread from wall to wall. So, that's the main part.
Yeah. So if anyone was to, first of all, taking it out of context, if you were just to say its wings spread out, touching wall to wall, or from wall to wall, spreading from wall to wall. Yeah. So if you're just taking that sentence, you're like, well, there's a description right there. It has wings, but you have to look at what he said earlier. He said it's shadow stretched like wings or something
exactly.
like that.
So if I go back just what I read there, there were two
parts. He's just going off that same description.
That's exactly it. So in the first part, it says, the shadow about it reached out like two vast wings. So the shadow was around it and it was like two wings. So he's clearly using like a metaphor there or a simile where he's saying it was like this. And then later on, he says, but its wings were spread from wall to wall. And that's within the same descriptive paragraph there where he's talking about the shadow was around it like wings.
Shadow around it.
And the wings were spread from wall to wall. So there, I mean, I've read that the first couple of times I read that, I think I was like, definitely has wings. Maybe they were hidden a bit in the shadow, but they were there. Its wings were spread from wall to wall. But I think the more I read it, I would say it's probably more that it's actually a metaphor. And I actually have to shout out Matt from Nerd of the Rings, because I was watching a video of his speaking about this exact subject. And he spoke about that and saying the way that Tolkien was writing, the way that Tolkien used to always write, very often he would use similar styles of writing where he would create a simile, he would create a kind of an idea, like the Balrog, the smoke was like wings, and then later he would just say his wings. I'm going to give you an example now. And he would basically say later on, he would take the example or the simile that he's given before, and then he would speak about that in a moment to make it seem like that was actually a real thing. But it's just he's making that descriptive kind of simile almost feel even more real. But it's just, that's his style of writing. So I'm going to read a little quote here that Tolkien has where he speaks about just before the fall of Numenor, where people would look out across the waters and they would see these they would see these clouds in the sky. So reading here this quote, it is, and out of the west there would be at times a great cloud in the evening, shaped as it were an eagle, with pinions spread to the north and the south, and slowly it would loom up, blotting out the sunset, and then uttermost night would fall upon Numenor. And some of the eagles bore lightning beneath their wings, and thunder echoed between sea and cloud. So there, he starts by saying that the cloud was shaped as if it were an eagle. And then later he said, some of the eagles bore lightning beneath their wings. So there, clearly we're not supposed to believe that the cloud has just transformed into an eagle and this eagle has lightning beneath his wings. It's saying that, it looks like an eagle. And then later he's saying the eagle now has lightning beneath his wings. So he's using the eagle. He's basically stating it is an eagle after having told us that it was not. So it seems like that's probably what's happening here as well. That he says that the smoke rose up like a cloud. Like a cloud. The smoke rose up like wings. And then later on, he's saying his wings stretched from wall to wall. So it seems from that now that I would say it should be fairly definitive that he does not, in fact, have wings, unfortunately. Although, unfortunately, I'm saying because they look absolute badass.
Like it's one of those things. Like I truly believe that with that comparison there with the eagles and the clouds, I do think that Tolkien didn't mean for the Balrogs to have wings, but it's just one of those things that it's so ingrained in us now that it's not an issue because there's no real contradiction. It's just like, oh well, actually, if you really digest it, he's just making a simile or he's making a metaphor. So I think if anyone is watching the movies and then going and reading the books for the first time and they never heard of this whole debate, they would just skim over that passage, wouldn't even take notice of the word like, and just be like, oh yeah, and here he's talking about the wings. And that's fine. It's fine for both ways are fine. There's no real contradictions. It's just what people imagine.
No,
I don't
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think that I'm positive that Peter Jackson, he wasn't stupid. It's not like he just skimmed over that. And I think him and John Howe together came up with this design, and they probably just said, like, which looks cooler. Like, we can get away with this by giving it wings because Tolkien almost says that it definitely has wings. But like you read out so lovely there. I don't think that is the case. But
yeah,
who cares?
Who cares? And again, I mean, for me,
it's fun to talk about.
It is fun to talk about. For me, this is like only very recently I've started being like, yeah, okay, I can kind of accept that they don't have wings, because for a good while I was just sort of, hold on to the fact that
Defending
I kind of enjoyed defending it, even though I knew I kind of didn't really have a leg to stand on. But I was like, look, you can't exactly 100% definitively say that they don't. And I was just like, I love the design of Balrogs with wings. I just think it looks so cool. I've seen some very few fan art drawings of Balrogs without wings that I've been like, oh, that looks class as well. Most of the time, whenever I see fan art and it's with wings, I'm always like, that just looks way better. It's just cooler.
Yeah.
So
and a lot of the time it is in the same kind of demonic kind of dragon shape, even if it doesn't have the wings. And nearly every single time you see that kind of art without wings, it's surrounded in shadow anyways, and that makes it look cool.
Flame and shadow.
Wreathed in flame. Yeah. It's actually funny today while I was driving into town, I was thinking about Lord of the Rings, of course, and I was thinking about, it's amazing how there's so few things that we argue about with Peter Jackson's movies. Like, you've got the Balrogs actually have wings, you've got, like, you know, lack of Tom Bombadil, you've got a couple of things, but like, how good are those movies that there's, you know, he covers 3 huge books and all the lore of Tolkien, and there's such few things that we can nitpick, and even those things that you nitpick were issues beforehand anyways. Whereas now, like, you know, you could put out a trailer for The Rings of Power or another TV show or anything, and you can nitpick it to death and be like, well, this is different, they've changed this, they don't have the rights to this, and blah blah blah. But it just seems like what Peter Jackson had was like perfect, and it still is perfect.
Still is to this day.
To this day.
So there you are now, and that was
there you have it.
Just gonna put my Fellowship with the Ring bookmark back in there. Put that away.